In a bustling family restaurant in Southern California, a quiet dishwasher named Danny was moments away from witnessing an act of cruelty that would change everything. What started as an ordinary weekend dinner rush quickly turned into chaos when the ruthless regional manager, Kendra Holt, made her move against a vulnerable single mother. But Daniel Reyes wasn't just a dishwasher. For 15 years, he had operated as the successful owner of this entire restaurant chain, responsible for building a business empire from nothing but a dream and relentless determination. When Kendra attempted to publicly humiliate and fire Marissa Lane for being 5 minutes late, she didn't realize she was triggering a reaction from someone trained to protect his people and his principles at all costs. Daniel launched a carefully orchestrated counterplan that unleashed consequences far beyond what anyone in that restaurant expected, revealing his true identity and dismantling a toxic system that had been destroying lives for months. What began as a simple undercover investigation transformed into a complete management revolution that exposed corporate abuse and restored dignity to an entire workplace. After that day, Southern California's restaurant industry would never forget the name Reyes, and the lesson that true leadership means having the courage to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want you to think about your own workplace for a moment. Have you ever witnessed someone in power abuse their authority? Have you seen a good person get crushed by a broken system? If this resonates with you, hit that like button because this story will absolutely blow your mind. And don't forget to subscribe. We're building a community of people who believe in standing up for what's right. The clatter of plates stopped first. Then the low hum of dinner conversation died, leaving only the harsh fluorescent buzz overhead, and Kendra Holt's voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade. 5 minutes. Marissa, 5 minutes. Daniel Reyes kept his head down, hands deep in soapy dishwater, but his shoulders tensed. From the dish pit, he could see straight through the kitchen past to where his regional manager stood, arms crossed, face stone-cold, towering over a woman who looked like she was shrinking into herself. Marissa Lane clutched her apron strings, knuckles white. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "My daughter's daycare called, and I don't care if your house was on fire." Kendra's words landed with surgical precision. "We have standards here. Punctuality isn't negotiable." Daniel's jaw tightened. Through the pass, he watched the dining room full of families pause mid-bite, children looking up at their parents with confused expressions, staff members Frostino at the grill, Sarah folding napkins, Marcus wiping down tables. Everyone knew what was coming. "Please," Marissa's voice cracked. "I need this job. My kids should have thought about that before you decided our schedule was optional." Kendra's tone never wavered. "Clean out your locker. You're done." The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Daniel's hands stilled in the dishwater, suds dripping between his fingers. This wasn't management, this was cruelty. This wasn't the restaurant he'd built from nothing, working 18-hour days, remembering every employee's name, their kids' birthdays, their dreams. Marissa nodded once, quick and sharp, like she was used to being dismissed. She untied her apron with shaking hands, the fabric falling to the floor like a white flag of surrender. Her eyes swept the room, once landing briefly on Daniel's face through the kitchen window before she turned toward the back office. "And don't expect a reference," Kendra called after her. "Unreliable employees don't get recommendations." That's when Daniel saw it at the moment. Marissa's composure finally cracked. Her shoulders sagged, just for a second, like the weight of everything she was carrying had suddenly doubled. She recovered quickly, straightening her spine and walking toward the lockers with whatever dignity she had left. Daniel pulled his hands from the water, wiping them slowly on a dish towel. His reflection stared back from the stainless steel backs, features hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses and a week's worth of stubble. The man looking back at him wasn't Daniel Reyes, he was Danny, the new line cook from Riverside, picking up weekend shifts for extra cash. 3 hours earlier, he'd stood in a budget motel bathroom, pulling on this same second-hand uniform. The polyester shirt still smelled like the thrift store, too big in the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. He'd removed his wedding ring, his expensive watch, anything that might give him away. In the cracked mirror, he'd practiced being invisible. The rumors had been filtering up to corporate for months, staff turnover spiking, customer complaints about service, anonymous reviews mentioning toxic management, and employees looking miserable. His assistant had compiled the reports in neat folders, but Daniel knew reports only told part of the story. He needed to see it himself. He'd expected to find corner cutting, maybe some procedural issues. He hadn't expected to watch a human being get destroyed in front of a room full of witnesses. "Back to work, everyone," Kendra announced, her voice returning to its usual brusque efficiency. "Show's over." But the show wasn't over. Daniel could feel it in the air, the way conversations resumed too quietly, how staff members avoided eye contact, the forced normalcy that felt like a house of cards ready to collapse. Customers were paying their checks early, shepherding children toward the exit. Tino appeared beside him, sliding a rack of clean glasses into place. "Rough day to start," he said quietly, not looking at Daniel directly. "Yeah," Daniel's voice Came out rougher than intended. She'd been working here long. 6 months. Good worker. Never missed a shift until today. Tino's hands moved efficiently, but Daniel caught the tight set of his jaw. Got 2 little ones at home. No family help. Daniel nodded, filing away the information. 6 months. He'd been so buried in expansion plans and quarterly reports that he'd never heard Marissa Lane's name. Never knew she existed until he watched her world fall apart. Through the kitchen window, he saw Marissa emerge from the back office, carrying a small cardboard box. Her movements were careful, controlled, like she was walking through glass. She made it halfway across the dining room before a little girl at table 6, maybe 7 years old, looked up from her coloring book. "Are you okay, miss?" Marissa stopped. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and Daniel saw the exhaustion underneath. The fear, the crushing weight of having to go home and explain to her children why mommy lost another job. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, and her smile was genuine, even as her voice trembled. "You enjoy your dinner? Okay." Then she was gone, disappearing through the front doors into the parking lot, taking with her any illusion Daniel had about what his restaurant had become. Kendra straightened her blazer and checked her watch. "Better efficiency already," she announced to no one in particular. "One less problem to manage." Daniel's hands clenched around the dish towel. The woman who'd just spoken this, stranger wearing his company's name tag, had never worked a dinner rush with broken equipment and a skeleton crew, had never stayed until 2 a.m., helping a server study for her GED, had never driven an employee to the hospital when they couldn't afford an ambulance. But confronting her now would blow his cover, and Daniel sensed there was more to uncover. If Marissa's firing was this casual, this public, how many other people had been ground down by this machine he'd created but stopped watching? He turned back to the dishes, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, remembering the promise he'd made to himself 15 years ago when he first opened these doors. He'd sworn his restaurants would be different. Places where hard work was rewarded, where people were treated with dignity, where someone like him, a kid who'd started washing dishes at 14, could build a life. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that promise. But watching Marissa Lane walk out those doors, carrying her small box of possessions and her enormous burden of responsibility, Daniel Reyes made a new promise. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel's hands moved mechanically through the dish cycle: rinse, wash, sanitize, stack, while his eyes mapped the restaurant like a crime scene. Every harsh word from Kendra, every flinch from the staff, every forced smile painted over exhaustion. The picture emerging wasn't just ugly, it was systematic. "You're pretty fast for a new guy," Tino said, sliding another bus tub onto the steel counter. Steam rose between them, like a curtain. "Most people take a week to get the rhythm." "Used to wash dishes," Daniel replied, which was true enough. "Long time ago?" Tino nodded, studying him with curious eyes. "Yeah." "Where?" "Family place. Small operation." Daniel kept his answers vague, but something in Tino's expression suggested that older man wasn't entirely buying the story. 15 years of working in kitchens had given Tino an eye for people, and Daniel could feel that scrutiny like a weight on his shoulders. "Family places are different," Tino said finally. "They remember you're human." Before Daniel could respond, Kendra's voice cut across the kitchen. "Marcus, table 12 is still waiting for their salads. Move." Daniel glanced through the past to see Marcus couldn't be more than 19, fumbling with plates, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The kid was drowning, and instead of help, he was getting public humiliation. "He's new," Tino muttered, as if reading Daniel's thoughts. "3rd week. Still learning. What happened to the last bus?" Tino's laugh held no humor. "Same thing that happened to Marissa. Kendra's got a quota system. Cut the bottom 10% every quarter. Keeps people motivated." Daniel's hands stilled in the water. A quota system. He'd never authorized anything like that. His company policy manual specifically stated that terminations required documentation, progressive discipline, approval from HR. But HR was 3 hours away in the corporate office, and Kendra was here, wielding power like a weapon. How long has she been running things this way? About a year? Ever since the last manager transferred out? Tino loaded glasses with practiced efficiency. "Used to be different here. People stayed, built relationships. Now," he shrugged, "now we're all just numbers on her spreadsheet." Through the dining room window, Daniel watched Kendra approach table 12, her smile sharp as broken glass. Whatever she said to the waiting customers made them nod quickly, apologetically, like they were the ones who'd done something wrong. "She's good at managing up," Tino continued. "Corporate loves her. Profit margins, efficiency ratings, all that jazz. They don't see what happens down here." Daniel wanted to tell him that someone from corporate was seeing it now. Instead, he asked, "What about Marissa? She really a problem employee?" Marissa, Tino's voice carried genuine surprise. "Hell no. Best server we had. Customers loved her. Staff respected her. Only issue was," he paused, glancing around to make sure Kendra wasn't within earshot. "She stood up for people. Asked questions when policies didn't make sense. Kendra doesn't like questions. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marissa hadn't been fired for being late. She'd been fired for being a threat to Kendra's authority. The tardiness was just an excuse, a convenient justification for removing someone who might inspire others to push back. Daniel felt a familiar heat building in his chest, the same anger that had driven him to work 80-hour weeks building this business, the same protective instinct that had made him fight for every employee, every customer, every principal he'd started with. A crash from the dining room interrupted his thoughts. Marcus had dropped a tray, sending glasses and plates cascading across the floor in a symphony of breaking porcelain. The entire restaurant turned to stare as the young man stood frozen, surrounded by the wreckage of his mistake. Kendra appeared, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Are you kidding me?" Her voice carried across the suddenly silent dining room. "Do you know how much that's going to cost?" Marcus stammered something about his hands being slippery, but Kendra was already in full attack mode. "This is exactly why we have standards. If you can't handle the basic requirements of the job, it was an accident." Daniel heard himself say. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kendra turned, her eyes narrowing as they focused on the man she thought was just another expendable kitchen worker. "Excuse me." Daniel stepped out from behind the dish station, still holding a wet towel. Every instinct screamed at him to back down, to maintain his cover. But watching this pattern repeat itself, watching another vulnerable person get crushed by the machine, was more than he could stomach. "I said it was an accident. Kid's been busting his ass all night. Maybe instead of humiliating him, we help him clean it up." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Daniel could feel every eye in the restaurant focused on this moment, this confrontation between the invisible dishwasher and the untouchable manager. Kendra's smile was poison sweet. "I don't recall asking for your opinion, Danny." She'd remembered his fake name, filed it away for future reference, probably already planning his termination. But Daniel found he didn't care. Some things were more important than maintaining cover. "Maybe you should start asking," he said quietly. "Might learn something." The explosion he expected didn't come. Instead, Kendra's expression went cold, calculating. "Clean this up," she told Marcus, never taking her eyes off Daniel. "Then see me in my office." She walked away, but Daniel caught her glance back, a look that promised retribution. He'd just painted a target on his back, but as he watched Tino and Sarah rush to help Marcus with the broken dishes, as he saw the relief in the young man's eyes, Daniel knew he'd made the right choice. "That was either really brave or really stupid," Tino said, appearing at his elbow. "Probably both." Tino handed him a broom. "Well, either way, you just made an enemy. Kendra doesn't forget, and she doesn't forgive." Daniel swept glass into a dustpan, thinking about all the things Kendra didn't know. She didn't know that her performance reviews were sitting on his desk, that her efficiency ratings were built on the backs of broken people, that her days of treating his employees like disposable resources were numbered. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to her," he said. Tino studied him again, that same curious look from earlier. "You know, Danny, you don't talk like most dishwashers I've met." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his assistant. "Board, meeting moved to Monday. Need those Q3 reports by tomorrow night?" The real-world corporate meetings. Profit margins, quarterly projections felt impossibly distant from this kitchen, from the broken glass at his feet, from the fear in Marcus's eyes. But it was waiting for him, expecting him to return to his corner office and his executive decisions. To resume being the kind of leader who measured success in numbers instead of human dignity. Daniel deleted the text without responding. Those reports could wait. Right now he had more important work to do. As the evening rush wound down and the last customers filtered out, Daniel found himself working beside people he'd never truly seen before. Tino with his quiet wisdom and protective instincts. Sarah, barely out of high school but already supporting her younger siblings. Marcus, trying so hard to prove himself worthy of a job that barely paid enough to live on. These weren't numbers. On a spreadsheet, they were the heart of everything he'd built, and he'd been absent so long he'd forgotten their names. But that was going to change, starting tonight. The breaking point came during the dinner rush the next evening, when Daniel watched Kendra reduce a 17-year-old hostess to tears over a seating chart mix-up. "I don't care if you're sorry, Jessica." Kendra's voice cut through the restaurant, like a whip. "Sorry doesn't unseat customers. Sorry doesn't fix your incompetence." Jessica, blonde hair, in a regulation ponytail, eyes red with embarrassment, stood frozen while diners craned their necks to watch the public execution. A family with young children looked mortified. An elderly couple whispered disapprovingly. The girl's humiliation was entertainment, and Daniel felt something snap inside his chest. "That's enough." The words came out quieter than he'd intended, but they carried the weight of 15 years of suppressed fury. Every head in the restaurant turned toward the dish pit, where Daniel stood with his hands dripping, his carefully maintained disguise finally cracking under the pressure of watching his life's work perverted into something ugly. Kendra spun around, her face flushed with the adrenaline of her attack. "What did you just say to me?" Daniel stepped out from behind the steel counter, no longer the invisible dishwasher but not yet revealing himself as the owner. He existed in the space between identities, and it felt dangerous and liberating at the same time. I said, that's enough. She's a kid. She made a mistake. Handle it like a professional or don't handle it at all. The silence that followed was electric. Tino paused, mid-flip on the grill. Sarah stopped folding napkins. Marcus stood frozen with a bus tub in his hands. Even the customers seemed to hold their breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kendra's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. You've got to be kidding me. Danny, is it the dishwasher thinks he can give me management advice? Maybe. The dishwasher sees things the manager doesn't. Like what, exactly? Daniel looked around the restaurant, the staff watching with wide eyes, at the customers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, at Jessica still standing there with tears threatening to spill. This was his moment of truth, the point where maintaining his cover became impossible. Like the fact that fear isn't leadership. Like the fact that you can't build a good restaurant by tearing people down. Like the fact that every person in this building deserves basic human dignity, regardless of what their name tag says. Kendra's face went white, then red. That's it. You're done. Get your things and get out. No. The simple word hung in the air like a declaration of war. Daniel could feel the shift in the room's energy. The way everyone leaned forward slightly, as if sensing that something fundamental was about to change. No. Kendra's voice climbed an octave. You think you can just refuse a direct order from your manager? Daniel untied his apron slowly, deliberately, like he was performing a ritual, not from my manager, but from someone who's forgotten what management actually means. He walked past her toward the back office, feeling every eye in the restaurant follow his movement. Kendra hurried after him, probably thinking she was about to witness the most satisfying termination of her career. The office was small, cramped, lined with filing cabinets and corporate motivational posters that suddenly seemed obscene. Daniel closed the door behind them and turned to face the woman who had turned his dream into a nightmare. Sit down, Kendra. Something in his voice made her hesitate. I'm calling security. No, you're not. Daniel reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, the expensive leather one he'd hidden in his motel room for 2 days. From it, he extracted his driver's license and his corporate credit card, laying them on the desk between them. Kendra looked down at the cards, and Daniel watched the exact moment recognition hit her. Her face went through a spectrum of expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, desperate calculation. Mr. Reyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Sit down. This time she obeyed, sinking into the desk chair like her legs had given out. Daniel remained standing, studying the woman who had been destroying his business, one humiliation at a time. I can explain, she started, but Daniel held up a hand. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is anything other than what it is. He moved to the filing cabinet, pulling out employee records, termination notices, right, performance reviews, the paper trail of systematic abuse, all bearing Kendra's signature. Marissa Lane, 6 months, excellent performance reviews until last week, then terminated for tardiness. Marcus Henderson, 3 write-ups in 2 weeks for minor infractions. Jessica Reeves, hired 3 weeks ago, already on probation. He dropped the files on the desk. Should I continue? I was maintaining standards. You were creating a culture of fear. Daniel's voice remained calm, but Kendra flinched like he'd shouted. You were turning my restaurant into a place where good people are afraid to make mistakes, where teenagers get humiliated in front of their families, where single mothers lose their livelihoods because you decided they weren't sufficiently terrified of you. Kendra's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Whatever excuses she'd been preparing crumbled under the weight of what she'd been caught doing. The numbers. Daniel almost laughed. You want to talk numbers? Staff turnover, up 40%. Customer complaints, up 60%. Anonymous reviews calling this place toxic and abusive. You've been managing up so well that nobody in corporate noticed you were burning the whole operation down from the inside. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. But I noticed because I've been washing dishes next to people you've terrorized. I've been watching good employees walk out that door with their dignity in pieces. I've been seeing what my business really became when I stopped paying attention. The fight went out of Kendra all at once. She slumped in the chair, no longer the imperious manager, but just a woman who'd been caught destroying something beautiful for the sake of numbers on a spreadsheet. I thought the corporate office wanted efficiency. Results? I was delivering results. You were delivering trauma. Daniel straightened up. Clean out your desk. Don't come back. Mr. Reyes, please, it's over. Kendra, this stops now. She nodded once, quick and defeated, and began gathering her personal items with shaking hands. Daniel watched her pack her coffee mug, her motivational calendar, her corporate achievement awards, the artifacts of a career built on the broken spirits of the people she was supposed to lead. When she was finished, she stood at the door for a moment, as if waiting for a reprieve that would never come. I was good at my job, she said quietly. No, Daniel replied. You were good at convincing people, you were good at your job. There's a difference. After she left, Daniel sat alone in the office, surrounded by the paperwork of institutional cruelty. Through the thin walls, he could hear the restaurant slowly Returning to life's conversations resuming, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary sounds of people trying to do their jobs without fear, but the hardest part was still ahead of him. He had to walk back out into that dining room, face the people he'd let down, and figure out how to rebuild something he'd allowed to be destroyed. Daniel Reyes, successful restaurateur, had just fired his regional manager. Now Danny, the dishwasher, had to figure out how to earn back the trust of people who had every reason not to believe in management promises anymore. He straightened his borrowed uniform shirt, took a deep breath, and opened the office door. The dining room fell silent when Daniel emerged from the back office. Every face turned toward him, staff members frozen mid-task, customers pausing conversations, even the children sensing the weight of the moment. He stood there in his thrift store uniform, no longer hiding behind the anonymity of the dish pit but not yet ready to reveal the full truth. Kendra was gone. Her departure had been swift and quiet, like a storm passing through, leaving behind the kind of stillness that follows destruction. Is everyone okay? Daniel asked, his voice carrying further than expected in the hushed space. Jessica, the young hostess, wiped her eyes with a napkin someone had handed her. Marcus clutched his bus tub like a shield. Tino emerged from the kitchen, studying Daniel, with those sharp, knowing eyes. We're good, Danny, Tino said carefully. Kendra decided to step out for the evening. Daniel almost smiled at the diplomatic phrasing. She won't be coming back. The words rippled through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Staff members exchanged glances, hope warring with disbelief, relief tempered by the fear that this was temporary, that tomorrow would bring a new manager, just as cruel as the last. Look, Daniel continued, moving closer to the center of the dining room, I know things have been difficult around here. I know people have been hurt, and trust has been broken, and words like things will be different probably sound pretty hollow right now. A customer at table 6, an older man with kind eyes, nodded encouragingly. His wife was watching with the intense focus of someone who recognized an important moment when she saw one. But I need you all to know something. Daniel paused, feeling the weight of what he was about to reveal. I'm not just Danny, the guy who's been washing your dishes for 2 days. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out the wallet he'd shown Kendra, extracting his business card and holding it up so everyone could see. My name is Daniel Reyes. I own this restaurant. I own all 6 restaurants in this chain, and I've been undercover here because I heard rumors that something was wrong, and I needed to see it for myself. The silence stretched like taffy. Then Sarah, the young server, whispered, Oh my God. I came here thinking I'd find some policy violations, maybe some corners being cut. What I found was so much worse. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he spoke. I found good people being treated like they were disposable. I found a culture where fear was being used as a management tool. I found a place that bore my name but had forgotten everything I built it to represent. He looked directly at Jessica, who was staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Jessica, what happened to you tonight was unacceptable. No employee should ever be humiliated in front of customers, especially not for the kind of honest mistake that everyone makes when they're learning. I'm sorry it happened, and I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. The girl's face crumpled with relief. I thought I was going to get fired. You're not getting fired, you're getting a raise, and proper training, with someone who understands that making mistakes is part of learning, not grounds for public execution. Daniel turned to Marcus, who was still frozen by the kitchen door. Marcus, you've been written up 3 times in 2 weeks for things that shouldn't even be infractions. Those write-ups are being removed from your file. You're a good worker, and anyone who tells you different is lying. Then he looked at Tino, who was leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Tino, you've been protecting these people as much as you could, haven't you? Standing between them and the worst of it? Somebody had to, Tino replied simply. Well, now, you won't have to do it alone. Daniel addressed the entire room again. Effective immediately. We're implementing some changes. There's going to be an anonymous suggestion box where you can report problems without fear of retaliation. We're instituting monthly staff meetings where everyone gets to speak, not just management. And there's going to be a company independent who investigates complaints about management behavior. He paused, gathering himself for the hardest part. But before we talk about the future, I need to address the past. Specifically, what happened yesterday to Marissa Lane. The name hung heavy in the air. Several staff members looked down, remembering the cruelty they'd witnessed, the woman who'd been destroyed for the crime of being human. Marissa was fired for being 5 minutes late because her daughter's daycare had an emergency. She was fired not because she was a bad employee, but because she represented something Kendra couldn't tolerate: compassion over compliance. Humanity over efficiency metrics. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'm calling her now. I'm going to ask her to come back, not as a server, but as our new assistant manager, with a salary and benefits and the authority to make sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else. She might not come back, Sarah said quietly. After what happened, she might not trust us. She might not, Daniel agreed. And if she doesn't, I'll understand. but she deserves the chance to say no to someone who's actually sorry, instead of being dismissed by someone who never cared about her in the first place. He dialed the number his assistant had provided from HR records. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a tired voice answered, "Hello, Marissa. This is Daniel Reyes. I own the restaurant where you worked until yesterday. I was wondering if you had a few minutes to talk." Silence on the other end. Then, "I don't understand. I know you don't. And I know you have no reason to trust anything I say. But I was there yesterday when you were fired. I saw what happened, and I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to explain." Another pause. "You were there. I was the dishwasher. The new guy, Danny. I watched the whole thing, and I've been sick about it ever since." The dishwasher. Her voice was flat, processing. "You're the owner, and you were washing dishes. I needed to see what was really happening in my restaurants. What I saw was not what I built, and it's not what I'm going to allow to continue." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could imagine her trying to reconcile the man who'd watched her get fired with the owner, calling to mock her further. "Marissa, Kendra Holt no longer works for this company. She was terminated tonight, and I'm calling to offer you a job, not your old job, but a better one. Assistant manager, full benefits, $50,000 to start, with the authority to hire and fire and the responsibility to make sure our staff is treated with dignity." The silence stretched so long he thought she might have hung up. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because you deserve it. Because this place needs someone who understands what it's like to be vulnerable, to need a job, to worry about taking care of people who depend on you. Because leadership should come from compassion, not contempt." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Say you'll come in tomorrow and let me show you what I'm trying to build here. Say you'll give me a chance to prove that not everyone with authority has to abuse it." When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "Okay, I'll come in tomorrow. We'll talk. Thank you." After he hung up, Daniel looked around the restaurant at the staff watching him with cautious hope, at the customers who'd stayed to witness this strange intervention, at the place he'd built and nearly lost. "There's going to be a lot more changes," he said. "Better scheduling that respects your personal lives. Regular performance reviews that focus on development, not punishment. A pathway for advancement that doesn't require you to become someone cruel." Tino pushed off from the counter and walked over, extending his hand. "Welcome back, boss." Daniel shook it, feeling the weight of that title not as a mark of power, but as a responsibility he'd neglected for too long. "I was never really gone," he said. "I just forgot how to see." As the evening wound down, Daniel found himself back in the kitchen, but this time working alongside his staff instead of spying on them. He helped Jessica learn the new seating rotation, showed Marcus a better way to balance bus tubs, listened to Sarah talk about her plans to go back to school. When the last customer left and the doors were locked, the staff began their closing routine with an energy he hadn't seen before. Not the frantic desperation of people afraid to make mistakes, but the steady rhythm of a team working together. "You know," Tino said, wiping down the grill beside him, "I kind of figured you weren't really a dishwasher." "Yeah? What gave it away?" "The way you held yourself when Kendra went after people, like you were used to being the one who makes the calls." Tino smiled. "Plus, your hands were too soft for someone who's been washing dishes their whole life." Daniel laughed, looking down at his pruned fingers. "I'll have to work on that." "Nah, don't. Those soft hands built something good here. Just took a while to remember what that looked like." As they finished cleaning, Daniel's phone buzzed with messages from corporate, his assistant wondering where he was. Board members asking about the quarterly reports. Investors wanting updates on expansion plans. The other world, the world of spreadsheets and profit margins, demanding his attention. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Tomorrow he'd return to the executive suite, to the meetings and the reports and the endless cycle of corporate demands. But he'd never again forget the view from the dish pit, the perspective of the people who made his success possible. He'd seen what happened when leadership lost its way, when power became separated from compassion, and he'd learned that the most important management skill wasn't reading reports or analyzing metrics. It was the simple act of paying attention to the human beings whose lives depended on the decisions he made in distant boardrooms. The restaurant was quiet now, clean and ready for tomorrow. Daniel turned off the lights and locked the door, but he didn't feel like he was leaving. This place was in his hands again, and this time he intended to hold it gently. Outside in the parking lot, under the soft glow of the street lamps, Daniel Reyes took off his thrift store uniform for the last time, but he folded it carefully before putting it in his car, because he never wanted to forget what it felt like to be invisible, to be powerless, to depend on the kindness of strangers who held your future in their hands. Some lessons were too important to forget twice. The lesson here isn't just about restaurant management, it's about the power we all have to make a difference, even when we think we're powerless. Daniel could have stayed in his corporate office, reading reports and trusting the numbers, but instead he chose to see the truth with his own eyes and act on it. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is step down from your position of comfort and truly understand the people you're meant to serve. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one person really can change everything, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of justice, courage, and people standing up for what's right. Until next time, remember you never know when you might be the person someone else is counting on to do the right thing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.